Log Entry 1. If you're listening to this, it means I failed. It means the 2026 warnings from Dr. Eris were real. The adaptive zombie hordes are here. Don't make the same mistakes we did. This is how it started. Log Entry, October 12, 2025. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne. I was a junior virologist at the Atheria Institute, a place that promised to change the world. And it did, just not the way we advertised in the brochures. If you're listening to this, if this compressed audio file somehow survived the purge and the fires, then I need you to understand. What happened in 2026 wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random mutation from a bat or a monkey. It was designed. And the first whispers of it, the first time I heard the name, was in the Atheria cafeteria. Project Chimera. That's what they called it. Officially, it was a DARPA-funded initiative to study extremophilic retroviruses for rapid cellular regeneration. The goal was battlefield medicine. A soldier gets hit, you spray them with this stuff, and the wound closes in seconds. Sounds like a miracle, right? We all thought so. We were young, idealistic, and about to win Nobel Prizes. But the rumors were different. Whispers in the hallways, encrypted data fragments I'd find on discarded drives. They weren't just trying to heal tissue, they were trying to improve it. They were building a virus that didn't just repair, but adapted. It would analyze the damaged tissue, the cause of the injury, and rewrite the cells to be resistant to that specific trauma in the future. A biological learning algorithm. A rapidly evolving virus that could think on a cellular level. Dr. Eris, my supervisor, he was the lead on Chimera. A brilliant, terrifying man. I remember asking him once, half joking, what happens if this thing gets out? What happens if it decides a common cold is a trauma and rewrites our immune system? He just looked at me, his eyes cold and distant, and said, "Evolution, Elias, is simply a series of successful adaptations. We are just accelerating the process." I should have run then. I should have leaked everything. But I was ambitious. I was a fool. I kept working. I kept my head down. And I started keeping this audio diary. Just in case the whispers were right. The core of Project Chimera was a synthetic retrovirus, designated CV1. It was unlike anything nature had ever produced. It didn't just insert its RNA into a host cell. It created a symbiotic link. It used the cell's own mitochondria as tiny biological processors, forming a decentralized network within the host organism. The genius and the horror of it was the adaptive mechanism. Let's say the host tissue was burned. The first wave of CV1 would repair the damage, but it would also send back data through this mitochondrial network. The central viral colony, what we call the codex in the host's brainstem, would process this data and issue new instructions. The next generation of the virus, produced within minutes, would carry a new protein sequence that made the healed skin more resistant to heat. It was a constant, iterative cycle of damage, analysis, and adaptation. We tested it on lab rats. We'd make an incision on one. Within an hour, the wound was gone. The second time we tried to make the same incision, the scalpel couldn't break the skin. The tissue had become tougher, more resilient. It had learned. We saw rats regrow limbs, survive lethal doses of toxins. We were gods in a sterile lab, creating immortal vermin. Eris was ecstatic. He saw a future with no disease, no injury. I saw a weapon, a biological agent that, if it ever identified humanity itself as a threat, would learn, adapt, and rewrite us into something else entirely. The ethical debates were brief. The funding was too much, the promise of a military advantage too great. Anyone who raised concerns was quietly reassigned. I started copying data, encrypting it, storing it on a keychain drive I never let out of my sight. I documented the simulations. The models showed that if CV1 ever contaminated a water supply, it would be unstoppable. The virus was engineered to survive outside a host,
to lie dormant on surfaces, in water, in the air. The simulations predicted a 99.8% infection rate in any major metropolitan area within 72 hours. But the truly chilling part was the hive proximity variable. The simulations showed that infected hosts, when in close proximity, would begin to network. Their individual viral colonies would communicate, sharing data, learning from each other's experiences. A wound sustained by one host in New York could, in theory, grant resistance to that same injury to a host in Los Angeles. It was a biological internet, a hive mind. We were building the perfect organism, and we were too arrogant to see that we were making ourselves obsolete. I recorded all of this, my voice shaking, into my phone every night. I felt like a man watching a tidal wave build on the horizon, screaming a warning that no one could hear over the sound of their own applause. The final piece of the puzzle, the key that turned this from a miracle cure into a doomsday weapon, was its effect on necrotic tissue. We had a test subject, Rat 73, that died of a heart attack mid-experiment. Standard procedure was to incinerate, but Eris stopped us. He wanted to see what the virus would do. We watched on a grainy monitor for 48 hours. At first, nothing.
Then, the CV1 colony, deprived of a living system to power its mitochondrial network, found a new energy source: anaerobic respiration. It began to reanimate the dead tissue. It couldn't restart the heart or the higher brain functions, but it could move the muscles. It could stimulate the brainstem. The rat, it got up. It shambled. It was clumsy, driven by the virus's one core directive: survive, spread, adapt. It wasn't alive. It was a puppet, a dead thing animated by a thinking, learning parasite. That was the day I knew. That was the day I stopped thinking of it as Project Chimera and started thinking of it as the end of the world. The scientists who saw that footage, we didn't sleep for weeks. But the project wasn't shut down. The military applications were too promising. Imagine a soldier who doesn't die, a soldier who, even after lethal injury, gets back up and keeps fighting. They saw an army. I saw the first of the adaptive zombie hordes. Log entry, January 7th, 2026. It's snowing. I remember that. The world outside the lab was quiet and white and clean. Inside, it was chaos. The breach didn't happen with a bang. There was no explosion, no dramatic containment failure. It was a stupid, mundane accident. A lab tech named Miller, a good kid, just a few years out of college, nicked his glove on a broken beaker in the Chimera wing. A tiny, insignificant tear. He didn't even notice. He followed protocol, decontaminated, went home. But the virus was already in him. It was rewriting him, learning him. We saw the data the next morning. Miller's employee health monitor, which we all had to wear, was pinging every server in the institute. His vitals were impossible. A core temperature that was plummeting, but a metabolic rate that was skyrocketing. His cells were fighting a war, and the virus was winning. Aris locked the facility down. No one in, no one out. But it was too late. Miller was at home, in his downtown apartment. We watched through the city's CCTVs, a feed Aris somehow patched into our system. We saw him convulse. We saw him fall. We saw his wife rush to his side. And then we saw him get up. He wasn't Miller anymore. His movements were wrong, jerky, inhuman. He was driven by the one directive: survive, spread, adapt. He bit her. And just like that, the first two nodes of the network were active. The simulation was no longer a simulation. It was a live feed. Aris was calm, terrifyingly calm. He wasn't trying to stop it. He was observing, taking notes. He saw this as the ultimate field test, the culmination of his life's work. "Look, Elias," he said, pointing to a screen showing the viral load in the city's water treatment plant. Miller's apartment was less than a mile away. It's already in the system. Magnificent. I knew I had to get out. I grabbed my drive, my recorder, and a go bag I'd packed months ago. The lockdown was tight, but I knew the maintenance tunnels, the parts of the Institute that weren't on any official schematics. As I was making my way through a dark, dripping tunnel, the Institute's primary power went out. The emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a blood-red glow. The alarm started screaming, not the fire alarm, the other one, the one we'd only ever heard in drills, the biohazard containment failure alarm. I heard gunshots from the levels above, screams. The security team was trying to fight it. But how do you fight a man who, when you shoot him, just heals the wound and keeps coming? How do you fight something that learns from every bullet you fire? I made it to an emergency exit that led out into the woods behind the Institute. It was cold. The snow was coming down hard. I looked back at the building. It was a tomb. I could see figures through the windows, stumbling, falling, rising again. I ran. I didn't stop running until the sounds of the alarms and the screams faded behind me, replaced by the crunching of my own feet in the snow. I had the data. I had my testimony. I thought I could warn people. I thought I could make a difference. But the world was about to get very, very loud. I found a small motel a few towns over, paid in cash, turned on the TV. The news was reporting a severe and aggressive flu outbreak originating near the Institute. They were calling for calm. They were telling people to stay in their homes. They were setting up quarantine zones. It was the exact protocol the simulations had predicted the government would follow. A protocol the simulation also predicted would fail catastrophically. The virus wasn't just airborne. It was everywhere. In the water, on the door handles, in the very air they were breathing. Locking people in their homes was just marinating them in it. I spent that night, hunched over my laptop, trying to decrypt the final data files from Eris's personal server, which I'd copied. And that's when I found it. The real purpose of Project Chimera. It was never about healing soldiers. That was just the cover story, the excuse. The final project file was titled Vril Ya. It was a reference to some old Hollow Earth sci-fi novel. The file detailed Eris's true belief that humanity was a failed species, a plague on the planet. He believed our individuality, our emotions, our egos were our fatal flaw. Chimera was designed to fix that. It wasn't just a virus. It was a forced evolutionary leap. It would strip away our humanity, our consciousness, and unite us all into a single, adaptive, unthinking, and immortal organism. A true hive mind with the planet as its host. He wasn't a mad scientist trying to play God. He was a religious zealot, and the CV1 virus was his sacrament. He hadn't contained the breach. He had initiated it. This wasn't an accident. It was the rapture. I smashed the laptop. The data was on my drive. The drive was all that mattered now. I had to get it to someone, anyone, who could create a counteragent. But who could I trust? The government was either complicit or clueless. The media was just a mouthpiece. I was alone. Outside my motel room window, the first sirens began to wail in the distance. The sound didn't stop for a very long time. It was the soundtrack to the end of the world. Log entry, January 15th, 2026. It's been a week since the breach. A week is a long time when every second is spent running. The cities are gone. It happened so fast, faster than anyone could believe. The aggressive flu became the rabid sickness, and then the news just stopped. The broadcasts were replaced by emergency alerts, and then static. The first wave, the ones infected by the initial airborne and waterborne strain, were what you'd expect. Slow, clumsy, driven by a base instinct to bite, to spread the virus. I call them the shamblers. They were terrifying, yes, but they were manageable. They were like the movies, a threat, but a predictable one. I saw the fall of Philadelphia from a hillside miles away. I watched the lights of the city go out, block by block, like a dying star. I heard the cacophony of sirens and screams fade into a low, constant moan that seemed to rise from the city itself.
The military tried. They set up blockades, safe zones, but they were fighting the last war. They shot the infected, and the infected got back up. They used explosives, but that just spread contaminated tissue over a wider area. And worse, for every soldier who fell, a new, highly trained, body-armored infected rose to take his place. They didn't understand. They thought they were fighting people. They weren't. They were fighting a single, distributed organism with millions of bodies. You can't kill an idea. My goal was to get to the CDC headquarters in Atlanta. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. If anyone had the resources to analyze my data and synthesize a weapon against Chimera, it was them. The journey south was a blur of abandoned cars, looted stores, and the constant, unnerving silence of a world without people. The silence was always worse than the screaming. At night, I'd hole up in an attic or a basement, listening to this audio log, reminding myself of the truth, of what this thing really was. I had to stay sane. I had to remember. I started documenting the shamblers' behavior. They were drawn to sound, that was obvious, but it was more than that.
They seemed to resonate with certain frequencies. A car alarm would draw them in, but the steady hum of a power transformer would make them agitated, more aggressive. They were simple, but they weren't random. There were patterns. They would congregate in large numbers, standing motionless for hours, as if waiting for instructions. And then, as one, they would all turn and start walking in the same direction. I didn't know what they were doing then. I just knew it was wrong. I had my first close call in rural Virginia. I was siphoning gas from an abandoned truck when I heard it. The shuffling, the low, wet groan. There were 3 of them, coming out of the woods. A family, maybe. A mother, a father, a little girl still in her pajamas. Their eyes were milky white. Their skin was pale and waxy. They moved with that horrible, disjointed gait. I raised my rifle. My hands were shaking. I'd seen them from a distance, but this was the first time I was close. Their faces were blank. There was nothing behind the eyes, no recognition, no pain. Just the virus. Just the directive. I pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the silence. The first one went down. The other 2 didn't even flinch. They just kept coming. I fired again and again. I had to destroy the brain. That was the only way. Sever the connection to the codex, the viral colony in the brainstem. I emptied the clip. They lay still. I stood there for a long time, the smell of gunpowder stinging my nostrils. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a murderer. But that was the trap. Thinking of them as people. They weren't. They were just the puppets. The virus was the puppeteer. I took what I needed and moved on. The image of the little girl's empty face burned into my mind. The world was dying, and I was becoming a part of the disease. The further south I went, the worse it got. The military blockades had become slaughterhouses. Wrecked tanks, abandoned armor, and bodies. So many bodies, both human and infected. It was clear the military had lost. They had been overrun. And every soldier they lost was another weapon turned against them. I saw infected soldiers in full combat gear, their helmets still on, their rifles still clutched in their dead hands. They couldn't use the weapons, not yet, but their body armor made them incredibly difficult to put down. The virus had inherited a suit of armor. It was its first accidental adaptation. I realized then that every action we took to fight it, every strategy we employed, was just another data point for it to learn from. We weren't fighting it. We were teaching it. We were training our own executioner. The roads became impassable. I had to ditch the car and go on foot, sticking to the woods, traveling by night. The days were for hiding, for sleeping, for listening to the growing moans of the dead world. I was living on stolen canned food and fear. The data on my drive felt heavier every day. It wasn't just information anymore.
It was the last will and testament of the human race, and I was the sole executor of an estate of ghosts. Log entry, March 2nd, 2026. It has been almost 2 months. 2 months of this waking nightmare. I've reached the outskirts of what used to be Charlotte, North Carolina, and something has changed. The infected are different. The shift was subtle at first. I noticed that the shamblers, the slow ones, were becoming rarer. The hordes I saw moving in the distance seemed to have a new energy, a new speed. I saw the first one 3 days ago. I was scavenging in a deserted suburban house. I was on the 2nd floor when I heard a noise from the street. Not the usual slow shuffle and groan. This was fast, a blur of movement. I looked out the window and saw it. It was an infected, yes, but it was running, sprinting. Its movements were fluid, predatory. It vaulted a fence with an agility that was sickeningly inhuman. It wasn't just a reanimated corpse anymore. It was a predator. I call them runners. The virus had adapted. It had learned that slow-moving hosts were inefficient. They were too easy to avoid, too easy to kill. So it rewrote the code. It optimized the bodies. It bypassed the clumsy necrotic muscle control and tapped directly into the fast-twitch muscle fibers. It turned every host into an Olympic-level sprinter. This was the first true evidence of the hive proximity theory. The virus was sharing data. Somewhere, an infected host had been damaged in a way that required speed to overcome. Or maybe it had absorbed the DNA of an animal. I don't know. All I know is that the entire infected population, all at once, seemed to learn a new trick. The game had changed. Hiding was no longer enough. Outrunning them was no longer an option. The world became infinitely more dangerous in the span of a single day. My plan to reach Atlanta seemed naive, suicidal. But what was the alternative? Lie down and wait for them? I kept moving, cautiously, my senses on a razor's edge. Every shadow, every sound could be a runner. They were silent, too. They didn't groan or moan like the shamblers. They were quiet hunters. The only sound they made was the wet, slapping sound of their feet on the pavement as they closed in for the kill. I saw what they could do to a small group of survivors holed up in a gas station. The survivors had boarded the windows, barricaded the doors. They were prepared for shamblers. They weren't prepared for runners. I watched from a ridge a mile away through my binoculars. The runners didn't push against the doors.
They climbed onto the roof. They found a skylight and smashed through it, dropping into the building like spiders. It was over in seconds. The screams were short. And then, a few minutes later, the survivors, the ones that were left, walked out of the gas station. They weren't screaming anymore. They were part of the horde. They had been assimilated. But the evolution didn't stop with speed. Last night, I encountered something new, something far worse. I was moving through a darkened office building, using it as a shortcut to bypass a large horde on the main street. I was on the 3rd floor, in a large open-plan office filled with cubicles. The place was dead silent. I moved slowly, my rifle raised. And then I felt it, a sense of being watched. I froze. I scanned the room. Nothing, just empty chairs and dark computer monitors. I took another step, and a stapler fell off a desk in the far corner of the room. A distraction. My head whipped towards the sound, and in that split second, something lunged at me from behind a row of filing cabinets to my right. It was an infected. But it had been hiding. It had been waiting. It had set a trap. I fired on instinct, a burst from my rifle that stitched across his chest. It staggered back, but didn't fall. It was wearing the tattered remains of a police officer's uniform with a ballistic vest underneath. The virus had learned. Body armor works. It had retained that information. The infected officer didn't charge blindly. It ducked behind a cubicle wall, using it as cover. It was thinking. It was using tactics. I call them stalkers. The virus had now evolved beyond simple physical enhancements.
It was accessing residual memories and instincts from the host's brain. The police officer's training, his tactical knowledge, was now a weapon being used by the virus. I was pinned down. Every time I tried to move, it would pop out from a different angle, forcing me back into cover. It was using the layout of the room to its advantage. This wasn't a mindless monster. This was a thinking enemy. I had one grenade left. I poured the pin, cooked it for 2 seconds, and threw it over the cubicle wall. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Debris rained down. When the ringing in my ear subsided, I moved forward cautiously. The stalker was in pieces. But as I stood over the remains, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Another infected, a shambler, was standing in the doorway at the far end of the office. It hadn't attacked. It had just been standing there, watching. As soon as the stalker was destroyed, the shambler turned and shuffled away into the darkness. It was a scout, a spotter. They were working together. They were coordinating. This was no longer a mindless plague. This was an army.
The adaptive zombie hordes were real, and they were learning how to fight a war. My data, my mission, it felt more critical than ever. But my chances of completing it were dwindling with every new adaptation the virus created. Log entry, April 10th, 2026. I've been living in the ruins of a library for the past 3 weeks. It's a fortress of paper and silence. The books are useless now. Their stories and knowledge are relics of a forgotten world. But they provide good insulation, and their sheer volume dampens sound. I've had to stop moving. The hordes are too sophisticated now. Traveling on the ground is a death sentence. From my perch in the library's clock tower, I watch them. I study them. And I am afraid. The evolution has accelerated. What I saw with the stalkers was just the beginning. The infected are now operating as a true collective, a hive mind. There's no other word for it. They move in swarms, thousands strong, with a coordinated precision that is both beautiful and horrifying. They flow through the streets like a river of death. They are not individuals anymore. They are cells in a larger body. And that body has a brain. I've seen it. I call it the alpha. There is one in every major horde. It's different, larger. It's usually formed from a host that had a large physical frame, but it's more than that. The virus has augmented it. Its bone structure is thicker. Its muscle mass is grotesquely dense. Patches of its skin have hardened into a chitinous-like armor. It doesn't attack. It directs. It stands on a high point, a bus or a car, and it emits a series of low-frequency shrieks and clicks. And the horde responds. Instantly. It can direct a group of runners to flank a position, send stalkers to lay an ambush, or use a wave of basic shamblers to test defenses. I saw it happen. A group of National Guardsmen had fortified a bridge. They had machine gun nests, barricades, a solid defensive position. The horde approached, and the Alpha climbed onto a wrecked big rig to get a view. The Guardsmen opened fire, cutting down the first wave of shamblers. The Alpha shrieked, a high-pitched, piercing sound. The horde stopped. It held its position, just outside of effective range. Then the Alpha made a series of lower guttural clicks. From the sides, emerging from the sewer drains and alleyways, came the runners. They flanked the Guardsman's position in a pincer movement, moving with incredible speed. The soldiers were caught completely by surprise. While they were distracted, the main horde, led by stalkers using wrecked cars as cover, advanced. It was a coordinated, multi-pronged attack. It was brilliant. It was a strategy no human general would be ashamed of. The bridge fell in under 10 minutes. The virus had learned military tactics.
It learns from everything. I saw a horde encounter a river they couldn't cross. They stood at the bank for almost an hour, the Alpha seemingly observing the current, the width. Then it shrieked. A wave of shamblers walked directly into the water. They were swept away, but they began to pile up, their bodies snagging on a collapsed section of a pier, forming a gruesome, writhing dam, a bridge of bodies. And the rest of the horde walked across them. They sacrifice their own units to achieve an objective. They have no self-preservation, no fear, only the goal, the directive: survive, spread, adapt. And the adaptations are becoming more specialized. I've seen infected that are bloated, their bodies filled with some kind of flammable gaseous methane. They shamble towards a fortified position, and when they are shot, they explode, clearing the way for the others. I call them bloaters. I've seen small, child-sized infected that are incredibly fast and can climb sheer walls, acting as scouts to get into supposedly secure buildings. They don't attack. They find a way in, and then they let out a high-pitched scream that guides the rest of the horde. They are the key to the lock. The worst, though, are the shriekers. They seem to be a further evolution of the Alpha's communication ability. They are tall, emaciated figures with elongated necks and distended jaws. They stay in the center of the horde. When they perceive a threat, they let out a focused sonic blast that can shatter glass, disorient survivors, and attract every infected within a 5-mile radius. They are the horde's alarm system and its beacon. This is the ecosystem of the damned that Chimera has created. A perfectly balanced, brutally efficient army of monsters. Each new variant is a response to a problem the virus has encountered. Barricades created the bloaters. Locked doors created the child scouts. Hidden survivors created the shriekers. We are the architects of our own destruction. Every day I spend here, I pore over the data on my drive. I'm not a bioengineer, but I'm trying to find a weakness, a flaw in Eris's design. The virus is a network, so how do you kill a network? You can't just kill the bodies, the nodes. You have to attack the signal. You have to sever the connection to the hive mind. I don't know how, but the answer has to be in this data. It has to be. Outside, a storm is gathering. I can hear the horde moving. The low, constant moan of thousands. They are on the move. And I think they know I'm here. Log entry, May 21st, 2026. They found me. The library is no longer safe. A scout, one of the climbing variants, must have spotted me. The shrieks started an hour ago, and now the building is surrounded. The sound is a physical presence.
The glass in the windows is vibrating. The books are trembling on the shelves. It feels like the world is ending all over again. I've barricaded myself on the top floor in the rare books collection. Heavy oak doors, reinforced walls. It won't hold them forever, but maybe it'll hold them long enough. As I was piling books against the door, I heard a new sound. Gunfire. Not the panicked, sporadic shots of a lone survivor. This was controlled, automatic, rhythmic. It was coming from the street below. I crawled to a shattered window and looked down. What I saw, I almost didn't believe it. There were people down there. A small group, maybe a dozen, moving with professional efficiency. They were wearing scavenged armor, carrying modified weapons. They weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. They were using the horde's tactics against them. They created a choke point between two buildings and used a sound lure, a boombox blasting heavy metal, to draw a large chunk of the horde in. Then they hit them from the rooftops with Molotovs and focused fire. They weren't aiming for the mass, they were targeting the specialized variants. They took out a shrieker first, a single high-caliber rifle shot from a sniper I couldn't see. The moment it fell, the surrounding infected became disorganized, confused. The signal was cut. Then they focused on the bloaters, detonating them from a safe distance to take out chunks of the horde. It was a beautiful, brutal ballet of violence. They were smart. They had learned. They had adapted, just like the virus. One of them saw me in the window. A woman with a shaved head and a massive scar across her face. She raised her hand, not in a wave, but with two fingers pointed at her eyes, then at me. I see you. A promise, or a threat. The fight lasted for another 20 minutes. When it was over, the street was littered with burning, twitching bodies. The group methodically went through, putting down anything that still moved with cold, practiced precision. A few minutes later, I heard a voice call out from the bottom of the library stairwell. "Clear, we're coming up. Don't shoot, bookworm."
They found me. Their leader was the woman with the scar. Her name is Kaylin. She's ex-military. The rest of her group is a motley collection of survivors, a doctor, an engineer, a former cop. They call themselves the Bastion. They've been operating out of a fortified hospital on the other side of the city. They saw the Horde converging on my position and came to investigate. They thought I was a new type of infected, something that holed up and nested. Kaylin laughed when she saw my setup, my notes, my audio recorder. "Look at this," she said to her team. "We got ourselves a professor." I showed them the drive. I told them everything.
About Etheria, about Eris, about Project Chimera. The doctor, a man named Ben, looked through some of my notes on the hive mind and the alphas. He wasn't surprised. "We've seen it," he said, "the coordination. We just didn't know why. We thought they were evolving, but this is intelligent design." I am now with the Bastion. For the first time in months, I am not alone. It's a strange feeling. Hope. Their hospital stronghold is incredible. They have power, from solar panels on the roof. They're growing food in a hydroponics bay in the morgue. The engineer, a woman named Sophia, has turned the MRI machines into a powerful electromagnetic pulse weapon, though they can only use it once before it burns out. They are the best of what's left of humanity. They are resilient, resourceful, and ruthless. But they are fighting a losing war. They are winning battles, but the Horde is infinite. For every one they kill, 10 more are made. They are a tiny island in an ocean of monsters. But my data could change that. Ben and Sophia are working on it now. They've hooked my drive up to their secure systems. Sophia is trying to write a program that can hijack the virus's signal, the frequency the alphas use to command the Horde. She thinks she can create a feedback loop, a signal that will overload their neural network, effectively frying the brains of every infected in the broadcast radius. A kill switch. It's our only chance. But to broadcast the signal, we need an antenna, a big one. Something powerful enough to cover the entire city and maybe beyond. There's only one option, the WCRM broadcast tower in the center of downtown, the tallest structure in the city. It is also, unfortunately, the heart of the largest and most densely packed Horde I have ever seen. It's where their primary alpha has made its nest. To get there, to fight our way to the top and deploy Sophia's device will be a suicide mission. But everyone here, every single one of them, agreed without a moment's hesitation. They would rather die on their feet fighting for a chance than wait for the end behind concrete walls. I'm not a soldier, I'm a scientist, but I'll go with them. I have to. This is my fault, my burden. I started this diary as a warning. Maybe, just maybe, I can finish it as a solution. Log entry, June 1st, 2026. This is it, the final entry. In a few hours, we move on the tower. Sophia thinks the device is ready. She's calling it Orpheus, a signal to charm the beasts of the underworld. Poetic. Ben has given us all a cocktail of stimulants and adrenaline. We won't feel fear, or pain, or fatigue. At least, not for a while. Kaylin has laid out the plan. It's simple and insane. We're going to use the hospital's ambulance, lights and siren blazing, to punch a hole through the outer perimeter of the Horde. It'll draw most of them to it. That's the distraction. A small team, me, Kaylin, Sophia, and a sniper named Jax, will use the chaos to slip into the tower's sublevels through a service tunnel. From there, we fight our way to the top. The rest of the Bastion will hold the entrance, a last stand to buy us the time we need. Most of them won't be coming back. We all know that. We said our goodbyes. There's a strange peace here now. The fear is gone, replaced by a grim resolve. We are all dead already. The only thing that matters is that we take them with us. I'm uploading this entire audio diary to the Orpheus device. If it works, the signal will broadcast on every emergency frequency, every radio wave, every satellite band.
It will be piggybacked onto the viral kill switch, a message in a bottle. If there are other survivors out there, in other cities, other countries, they will hear my story. They will know the truth. They will know what this thing is, how it thinks, how it adapts. And more importantly, they will have the Orpheus frequency. They can replicate it. They can build their own weapons. This can be the beginning of the end for them. My warning can become their sword. If it doesn't work, if we fail, then this recording is an epitaph, a record of how we lost, a final testament to the hubris of men like Eris, who sought to perfect the world and only succeeded in burning it to the ground. Kalen is calling me. It's time. The roar of the horde outside is deafening. It's the sound of 1 billion hungry mouths, a single organism that wants to devour the world. But I'm not afraid anymore. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne. I was a witness to the end, and now I will be a weapon for the new beginning. Forgive us, and good luck. Static, followed by the sound of a blaring ambulance siren, gunfire, and a deep, guttural roar. The recording abruptly cuts out.